Good afternoon, morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, wherever you are. Um, Thank you so much for being here. So sorry that I missed you guys last week. I had to go to the doctor last minute and then it threw off my entire week. So, not COVID, but was dealing with some other health issues that were not the best. So, thanks for your patience. And happy to see you here today. Happy full moon. Oh, wait, excuse me, full moon. LOL. Happy new moon in Aries. I see I got Deb in the chat with me today. Hello, hello. Yeah, happy new moon in Aries. This one absolutely snuck up on me. I did not realize that that was today. So awkward, but I will say as far as hey Daria. Yes, good morning, good morning. Hello. Yeah, waiting for some more people to show up, so I'm gonna stall. Um, but yes, I definitely feel the Aries. I think as soon as the sun entered Aries after our last broadcast, it's like the tone shifted. And I don't know about you guys, but I immediately got more tired. Like I was just exhausted. And I don't know, just like a wave of fatigue hit me. That was my third or fourth week at my job, and I'm starting to feel, especially after this last week being on antibiotics all week, feeling like the dread that hits when the alarm goes off at 6:30 in the morning and I'm like, "Oh, I have to go to work. Are we sure? Every day? We need to do this every day?" So, I think Aries transits, they feel a little bit different than they did when Saturn was in Aquarius. I was thinking about this before the sun entered Aries that Aries transits might feel different this year because Saturn has moved on to a different place. Before Saturn and Saturn and Aquarius, or rather just Aquarius and Aries, they can kind of work with each other. They can kind of complement each other at times or boost each other up, hype each other up. But Pisces and Aries, they have that 12th house relationship with each other where they don't exactly get along and do anything remotely the same. So it's fire and water, and fire usually tries to impose itself on water. But with two adjacent signs like Pisces and Aries, it's a little bit more like they're just beefing. They're just beefing and kind of uncomfortable with each other. I do think something I was thinking about that I may not have discussed yet is the difference between Saturn being in Pisces versus Saturn being in Sagittarius, which I believe someone asked about on the last stream. Um, I think Saturn dislikes being in Sagittarius a lot more than in Pisces because Saturn in Sag is like Saturn in Saturn in an element one that it really doesn't fuck with as far as fire. And then Saturn in Sagittarius has Saturn in the 12th house position from its own sign Capricorn, right? Because Sagittarius is the 12th house to Capricorn. So I think that already creates kind of an antagonistic position for Saturn in Sag. So if you have that placement natally and your Saturn return felt like it was particularly rough, like there is a reason within the literature for that. Whereas Saturn in Pisces, Saturn is still in a weird position in the sense that it's in a Jupiter ruled sign, but it's in the second house um from one of its homes, Aquarius. So Aquarius is in the 12th house from Pisces versus Pisces being in the 12th house from Aquarius, which I think would be a little bit more antagonistic. So still weird, but not as malefic, maybe. But I don't know. That's just my guess. So, also hello to the few people who just joined. Welcome in. I'm just stalling until more people show up because I have two things to get into today. And one of those is the new moon in Aries that snuck up on me. And the other one is the Aries ingress for the year for the US, which I've been wanting to talk about for a while and have kept putting off. So I have notes, have lots of notes that I actually sat and went through. And for people who are interested in outer planets, I also have taken notes for where the outer planets are in the Aries ingress chart. So, from the notes that I've written down, a lot of this Aries ingress stuff has already happened, but I think it's what's nice about the Aries ingress. So, hi Sloan, hi Sloan, good to see you. Um, Apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong because I forget if it's Sloan or Sloan. Let me know. But yeah, so um if you're asking about, what is an Aries ingress, I've never heard of this in my life, or you've heard of an Aries ingress and have never had it explained, I can start by describing what that is. If you'll just do me a little favor and put a like on this video so more people know that we're live and chatting, I would love for you to do that. So, what is an Aries ingress? An Aries ingress is basically like doing a solar return for the nation. Sounds like Sloan. Okay, perfect. An Aries ingress is basically like doing a solar return, but for whatever location, um, for whatever location you live. So when I do Aries ingresses, I do them for the United States because I live here, and I set it for the location to be Washington D.C. And then you're looking for the moment that the sun enters 0 degrees Aries, hence why it's called an Aries ingress. Tropicals like to use this chart a lot because, of course, Aries is their astrological new year. Aries season, in the seasonal sense, like beginning of spring, is their astrological new year. But in sidereal, of course, it doesn't exactly match up with the spring equinox as much as it does just when the sun enters Aries. So there's a slight variation there in terms of some technical stuff. Also, hello to Eric. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. So yeah, this gives us a bit of a forecast for the rest of the astrological year until next April, basically. But due to reasons that I'll explain once we get into reading this chart's actually only going to last us 6 months until we get to the Libra ingress later this year. So I do have a chart pulled for that as well. And I'm not going to get into too many details about that chart because it's got way more going on than our Aries ingress chart does. But I did write down at least the placements. So if you are curious and want to look at the Libra ingress for the United States, I will also have info for that. And then you can check it out until a little bit later this year. We'll look at that chart. So that's mainly what I want to do today. And then I also want to leave time to pull some cards for the Aries new moon today. Just because I think, if we're going to be talking about the Aries ingress, which was actually a Libra full moon chart, or oh, no, it wasn't. It was the Virgo full moon that weekend. So ignore me. But since we're going to be talking about the Aries ingress, I figure also doing a reading for the Aries new moon today to really set off like the next 6 months would be interesting. So I'm curious about that as well. We will do that after I go through the Aries ingress chart. So before I get into that, just want to check in and see how everybody's doing with Saturn and Pisces. I'm still working on that Patreon post. I get busy at work and then I get distracted and then I don't make it around back to it, but I'm in the final paragraphs of that post. It's pretty long, but it's not super duper long. I think it's a manageable read. Definitely relevant for anyone with Saturn and Pisces, but also relevant for anyone who is just alive and enduring this transit with the rest of us. Something that I'm noticing with this transit with myself, someone who has the moon and the ascendant in Gemini, is that, and those are my only mutable placements, is that I've always noticed being emotionally sensitive because I have Venus and Jupiter in Scorpio. So I'm not unfamiliar to having water in my chart, water in the sky. Tend to know how that affects me, but I think the difference with Saturn in Pisces specifically squaring my moon is that I notice my body, like my physical body and sensations and general like health and well-being stuff the most. And for the most part, kind of like I already described, that looks like actually feeling tired, actually feeling hungry sometimes, or feeling like I have aches and pains, or like I just need to rest more. It's mostly been like I need to rest a lot more I actually feel 30 years old, whatever that means. Like, it's not, whenever you're a little bit younger, think like high school, right? If you played sports in high school or just ran around in high school, like many of us did, you kind of bounce back quick from a lot of physical activity and exertion. But then you get to like 30, and then you realize I really need to take care of myself in a lot of different ways in order to maintain, a workout regimen and to wake up at 6:30 a.m. every day. I need to actually go to bed on time. It's very, very difficult for me to stay up late now. Like I start falling asleep around like 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I really struggle to get into the bed in time because I'm just falling asleep on the couch. So those are things that I've noticed physically. It's just very much like having the moon in Gemini, like my body is awake and I'm not dissociating from my physical body as much as maybe I usually do. Not, it's very difficult to blow past my own limits, and I definitely have to have a routine. I do think some of that is also having Mars in Cancer, which we'll talk about a little bit later whenever we do talk about the new moon in Aries. But yeah, it's just like, oh, wow, I can't ignore my body at all anymore. A lot more sensitive in the physical sense. And I see some of you are also responding here in the chat, um, feeling irritable, which that was kind of the main thing that made me realize, oh, full moon, our new moon in Aries, the irritability is definitely present and in the room with us. Adaria says, I've been waking up without my alarm. I do the same usually, but there have been a few days where I wake up around like 5 and then I go back to sleep and then my alarm has to wake me up. That's the worst. I hate that. So yeah. And then what else? It's feeling like a delayed ouch in some ways. Emotions resurfacing from past events. That's a good one. I have definitely seen not seen, well, yeah, seen a lot of discussion around old memories resurfacing and kind of either reminiscing or just reflecting on past things. And now that you have some different context for those experiences, it's like registering differently in a way emotionally. So that also makes sense, especially after 6 years of Saturn in Saturn ruled signs, where it's very easy to ignore and dismiss your own feelings. In that way, that Aquarius very much muted emotions. Agree. Big agree. I keep seeing people vaguely warning about something bad happening in June, and it's starting to bug me because it's so vague but menacing. That's interesting. I don't know off the top of my head anything bad happening in June, but maybe that'll be something we can discuss on a different stream when I can look into the transits for the year, which are still available in my shop, by the way. If you haven't gotten them to your phone, you can still do that. All right. So I think we can get into this Aries ingress now. Got plenty of people in the chat with us. Thank you again for being here. Please tell a friend, tell them to pull up, and let's get a little insight into what we're dealing with this year as a collective, this astrological new year. So, to start, if you would like to pull an Aries ingress chart and you have all of your sidereal settings um, loaded on whatever software you use, the date is April 13th, 2025. And the time is 5:51 Eastern, for Washington, D.C. as the location. And then that should give you a chart that has Virgo rising. So we have a Virgo rising chart for our Aries ingress with the South Node there. The moon is in Libra. And then we have a stellium in Pisces. We're looking at Venus, Saturn, the North Node, Mercury, and the Lot of Fortune, all in the seventh house Pisces. The sun is in Aries in the eighth house. Jupiter is in Taurus in the ninth house, and Mars is in Cancer in the 11th house. So it's going to be flipped on here, but this is what it looks like. Cool. So this is our Aries ingress chart. This is going to tell us a little bit about the state of the nation, at least for the next 6 months, like I said. So first thing that we'll start with, the rising sign being in Aries, and the rising sign being in Aries, the rising sign being in Virgo, and what this means for the chart. So since Virgo is a mutable sign, having Virgo rising in the Aries ingress means that this is a chart that will change halfway through the year. Um, if you ever pull an Aries ingress and you have a cardinal sign rising, it'll change every quarter, I think, every quarter. And then fixed sign rising charts stay that way for the full year. So, fun fact. With Virgo rising in particular, something I've noticed about how to traditionally read Aries ingress charts is that you focus less on the signs and more on planets and planetary rulers for each house. So if you hear me talking about the signs a little bit less at first, that's why. So Virgo rising is really telling us about Mercury and its position in this chart, has a lot of strength in this chart as the traditional chart ruler, being the ruler of the first house. So the first house in an Aries ingress chart, mundane astrology, is going to talk about the country and the people who live in it, and the general conditions of prosperity and health for the nation overall. So, since the ruler of Virgo is in the seventh house in Pisces, this is going to tell us a few things. One, Mercury as a planet in a mundane chart talks about the literary world, mass communications, news media, trade and commerce, and also transport, whether that's public transport or like kind of intra-national transport in that sense. So since it's in the seventh house, this is going to say something about our communications and news media regarding foreign affairs, something that we've already seen a lot of, especially early in this year while we've had planets in Pisces. So foreign affairs, relationships with other countries, and the national marriage and divorce rates. Basically, this piece I'm talking about with having the stellium in the seventh house of this chart is really just stating over and over and over again that a lot of aspects of this year are going to deal directly with foreign relations and our relationships with other countries, our conflicts with other countries, and other foreign affairs. So I'm going to skip ahead to talk about Jupiter in Taurus in the ninth house of this chart because this is the strongest planet in this chart. It has the most influence in this chart because it's the ruler of all of those planets in Pisces in the seventh. So if you're just joining, we're talking about how one of the main themes in this Aries ingress chart for the United States is foreign affairs. And you will see here shortly that trade with foreign affairs is also very, very loud in this chart. So shifting to Jupiter in Taurus in the ninth house, what we're talking about is Jupiter in an Aries ingress chart is about a nation's beliefs and belief systems. It is about religion and religious figures. It's also about judges and the justice system and the nation's wealth. So think banks and bankers represented by Jupiter. With Jupiter in the ninth house, this is how our national beliefs and religion and religious figures and our justice system ties into shipping. So international shipping, overseas traffic, planes, long distance traffic, and international communications, along with the more institutional things that deal with religion, the courts, laws, and institutions and their authorities. So, what I'm thinking, first off, with this being a Taurus rule placement, is again, these are things that we're already seeing. Jupiter in the ninth is saying something about how us as a nation, we've been talking about how Jupiter in Taurus in general is kind of the rise or resurgence of Christofascism, right? Christ fascism, if you will. We know that the US is a Christian nation for the most part, despite having multiple different religions within it. And so that right there already shows that there is, if we speak about Taurus and this idea of trying to get people to conform or trying to have people assimilate to a shared or dominant identity, then yeah, there's something to be said about the strength of Jupiter here, um, and the ways that our legal systems and our international relations and affairs are all kind of around this country's beliefs around, yes, Christian nationalism and rising fascism and far right ideologies, but also what was I going to say? Oh, but also dealing with legislation around foreign affairs too. Legislation around trade and shipping, obviously. Legislation around like trying to get maybe other nations or citizens of other nations and immigrants and things like that to conform to our values, our rules, our way of life in a sense. And then also in some ways trying to impose that on other countries. So that one seems pretty on the nose. And honestly, all of these are going to seem really obvious. So sorry if I don't say anything new today. That's why I kind of want to just breeze through it. But having this be one of the strongest placements in the chart, yeah, it says a lot about how the rest of the year is just really digging in this idea of um how much our courts and the financial health and state of the nation is dependent on the beliefs of that nation. So also including things like individualism and also including things like any other Western ideologies that you can think of, patriarchy, um, sexism, racism, whatever else as like a belief or bias of the nation and how that informs our foreign affairs issues. The other part of this is that it's in that sextile with Venus in Pisces, which we've kind of talked about just having the Venus retrograde that we just moved through that kind of just ended, and how Venus in a mundane chart represents things like women's issues. For example, we've seen a lot of transgender bathroom bans specifically geared towards trans women because turfy women are insisting that they don't want um, trans women in women's bathrooms, which is ridiculous, right? But we've also seen things like abortion laws, abortion bans, and other legislation around women's bodies that's also included in that. Um, so that's one aspect of Venus in the seventh house. And then there's also some emphasis around the arts and entertainment and other diplomatic matters. So, what Venus wants to do is have diplomatic success and peace with other nations. But then, whenever you have it so closely conjunct Saturn in the seventh house, it kind of shows that there's a little bit of tension there. Obviously, we know why. Um, so, uh, whenever it comes to having Venus in a position where the seventh house can also represent, yes, like foreign affairs in a friendly sense, but also in a hostile sense. It's going to say a little bit about some of those things not going as well, and then some of the intra-communal conflicts within the US of people with different belief systems arguing about women's rights and things like that. The next thing, while we're on the Pisces subject, I'll just knock out both having Mercury in Pisces and having Saturn in Pisces in the seventh house. So again, seventh house for the most part is dealing with foreign affairs, foreign relations, relationships with other countries, and hostilities with other countries as well. I think having Pisces here is going to say something about how we as a people don't are not like privy to what's actually going on behind the scenes as far as our nation's communications and interactions with other countries. There's going to be the story that they tell us, and then there's going to be what's actually going on behind the scenes. And since it's Pisces and Pisces deals with things like lying by omission, speculation, having to make assumptions and read into things without having the full set of information, just kind of makes me feel like we won't have the full, well, I'll say this with a caveat because I do think Saturn in Pisces does a lot of revealing the truth of a situation. But I think for the most part, we'll have a lot of conflicting information coming forward about like what Donald Duck is actually trying to do with these trade wars or with his relationship to Netanyahu and Israel and all of those different things. But we as a people will definitely be subject to a lot of I don't know, I guess yes, gaslighting, but also like having to suffer consequences as far as people being deported, people being round up, and people being um kind of shipped away depending on if they actually conform once again to to the ideals of people in positions of power and authority. I think on the other side of that, there is a possibility. Well, I don't know. I was gonna try to put a positive spin on some of that because I feel like it doesn't have to be just negative, but off the top of my head, I'll have to think about that a little bit more. um, so yeah, having Saturn there, Saturn in mundane charts represents elderly people and just kind of elderly person affairs. So kind of things like nursing homes and um elderly healthcare like Medicaid and things like that, Medicaid, Medicare, things like that, Social Security, retirement, all of those different themes also falling in the seventh house. It's kind of interesting. Saturn also represents like life-threatening epidemics and landowners and land ownerships and farming industries, and how all of those things are connected to um, natural resources and metals and minerals and things like that. And so something that was kind of interesting was like the deals that we've been trying to make with other nations that have to do with land and resources. I don't know if y'all have seen like the mineral deals that he's tried to make with like Ukraine and stuff like that. Um well, deals, how he's trying to take advantage of those things. Yes, food safety being another one, and that's something we'll come around to as well when we talk about having the moon in the seventh house or the moon in the second house. But yeah, just the state of land and land ownership, having Saturn in the seventh house there, and the ways that it relates to foreign affairs, like stuff that's going on with the whole Gulf of America and then wanting to take Canada and wanting to take Greenland. Like, again, another thing that we don't really know what the purpose of doing that is, other than him just bullying other nations. But if there is a larger, bigger picture around that, we may not get the full truth around that this entire time. Things that we're kind of in the dark about. And I think there's also just like conflicting interests in general. Like when you think about something we've talked about with Pisces placements and like contradictions, there's the way that the right is really good about um, saying that they're doing one thing over here, so it draws your attention over here. But then the reality of what's happening over here directly contradicts the thing that they say they're trying to do. For example, fluoride in the water is something that's come up recently, right? We want to take fluoride out of the water because it can be harmful to children and it can be harmful to the pineal gland and different structures of the brain, and it can be harmful to pregnant women and the babies in the womb and all this other stuff, right? May or may not be true. They're doing more studies on that. I have listened to separate podcasts that say there may be some truth to that, but as always, the dose makes the poison. So if you're not drinking absurd levels of fluoride in the water, probably not really going to notice. But I say all of that to say, let's say, they ban fluoride in the water, just like they recently banned food dyes in foods, right? Seems like a good idea on the surface, but what's happening on the back end is them also passing legislation that doesn't regulate how much bullshit that corporations are dumping into the water supply, and they're pulling back regulations around different pulling back regulations around food safety in terms of the amount of salmonella that can be present in chicken or eggs, and then like bird flu, like less monitoring of bird flu, and then less monitoring of just basically the more that they pull back regulations, the more bullshit is going to be present in the food and water supply. But at the same time, we want to make America healthy again by banning food dyes and by taking fluoride out of the water and banning certain vaccines, even though there's a measles outbreak going on, things like that. So it's like, sure, it looks like they're doing some things that some people would be really excited about for whatever reason, because they think that the little bit of food dyes that exist, even though Europe has just because Europe has banned certain food dyes means that we need to ban certain food dyes, not realizing that Europe has legalized certain food dyes that we've banned, right? So it's all a lot of illusions and a lot of things that are not super obvious at face value, but whenever you read into it, you realize this is really just a distraction from a lot worse things that they're doing to make the nation, well, to make the people who are already at the top richer and the people who are at the bottom just kind of scramble around in circles and keep fighting each other. So don't fall for the okey doke. If it seems like they're doing a thing that, oh, okay, well, like, what's the harm in doing that? Probably something worse going on behind the scenes that's not actually supportive to us. Um, so yeah, sorry to be a Debbie Downer in that sense, but like we also said before, yeah, communications with foreign nations is something that's going to be relevant for the rest of the year. So keeping an eye on that. And then another interesting one, we also have Neptune in Pisces in the seventh house for this chart. So Neptune rules themes around socialism and communism and left-wing political ideas. It's generally geared towards collectivism, but it can also represent things like mobs, like the mob, you know, groups that run in secret. It can represent secret plots and frauds and grifters and illicit activities and conspiracies and things like that too. And I believe Neptune is at home in Pisces as well. So kind of shows that on the one hand, other nations maybe, or whenever it comes to foreign affairs, like are the stories that we tell about socialism and communism, especially coming from authority figures, shapes a little bit the societal beliefs and Western beliefs around what socialism and communism actually are, especially again going back to Jupiter in Taurus being the ruler of all of these Pisces placements. Like, on the one hand, there's a lot going on foreign affairs wise, but on the other hand, the stories that are being told to us about what's happening with us in other countries is not exactly the truth on its face. So it may also be the case that um, within the country, attitudes towards socialism and communism are also shifting, which we've seen, and people are seeking more of the truth about those things, especially as nations like China have information coming out about how their citizens are living, and other nations in eastern parts of the world just learning a little bit more about how they live with maybe not quite socialism, but uh, more population or populist oriented um what am I trying to say? Systems, right? Like people oriented systems and how that actually has been working for them versus us where we're just trying to help rich people get richer, right? So I thought that was interesting. And then of course on the other end of that, secret plots and frauds and grifters and things like that. I mean, people who have legislative power right now are a lot of frauds and grifters who are also participating in illicit activity. So I think that's interesting. Okay. Moving out of Pisces, let's talk about the sun next, I think. I want to talk about the sun next. Yes. So the sun, the star of the Aries Ingress chart, we have the sun in the eighth house. Now, I'll admit, when I first saw this chart, I got a little bit excited because I was like, oh, the sun, which rules authority figures and um, things like presidents and stuff like that, public heroes and presidents and authority figures in general, and having it in the eighth house of mortality and death. Got a little excited, but learning a little bit more, I was like, oh, okay, like the eighth house is also public mortality and death rates and people who die, financial relations, along with financial relations with other countries. So I quickly realized that a lot of this was, again, about the trade wars and about the financial state of the US. But that doesn't mean that it can't potentially be about other things. So, we're going to cross our fingers there and hold out hope that maybe we finally see some relief. Would that actually translate to being relief? Not really sure, but could be interesting. Anyway, don't want to get myself in trouble here. This is all just for entertainment purposes only. So yeah, sun in the eighth, dealing with financial relations with other countries. The reason I lean a little bit more into that the reason I lean into that, the finances of it all with the 8th house here is because we do have the ruler of the 8th house, Mars, in the 11th house in Cancer, and then there's also the moon in the 2nd house of this chart. So all of those things to me are going to speak a little bit more about money and then Congress's influence on money. That is because Mars in the 11th house is going to talk about Congress as well as friends of the nation and our allies, and then legislation in general. Now, of course, having Mars there is going to talk a little bit more about maybe saying that we're spending money on things like wars, which we've been doing, spending more defense spending and budget stuff, maybe potentially increasing or fluctuating. But Mars can also be a disturbance or a what's it called? A what's that other D word? Uh that I use for Mars. Disruption in spinning in those ways. So that's possible. Mars doesn't like to be in Cancer, as we've discussed. So it's not like this is a great position for it to be in, but um, things like strikes and conflicts, oppositional forces, fires, arson, all those types of things are represented by Mars. So, what I'm thinking is if there's a particular focus on the financial state or health of the nation, and Mars, the ruler of that, is talking about Congress passing legislation or disruptions with those things, then yeah, it does obviously look like the trade wars and things that we've been experiencing so far. um, I don't know that it necessarily looks like, I mean, on the one hand, the water trine between Mars and Saturn and all that stuff in the 7th house could look like a way to reinforce this idea of like more trade wars, more wars with other countries, more defense spending and all that type of stuff. And at the same time, with Saturn there, I mean, there's a possibility that kind of like I talked about before, that those things don't go as well as the current admin would like for them to go. I mean, we haven't seen too much success in terms of him actually being able to bully other nations into complying to the to the whatever it is that he wants to get, that he's using tariffs as a way to threaten. He hasn't seen very much success with China at all. Of course, the impact of that falls on us as consumers, but China's not bending. And some other countries haven't been bending to his will either. So, in some ways it's working out, in some ways it's not. So I think it's a little bit of a 50-50, mostly looking like dysregulation of the markets, mostly looking like dysregulation um of finances and dysregulation in terms of defense spending. Well, maybe. Maybe not. I'm not 100% confident on that part of it, but I don't really know enough to further comment other than just like reading the things that are coming up in the chart. So, is there anything else I would add to that? I mean, if I go to other things I wrote about Mars and Cancer, that just takes us back to the moon. So, Mars and Cancer in the 11th house, like I said, Mars represents military and war and industry disputes, strikes, conflicts. So that could also look like things like unionizing and labor strikes too, especially in the 11th house. It'd be cool to see more unionizing and labor strikes. However, we do know that because of Jupiter and Taurus in the 9th house, that is not something that the current admin appreciates very much. So there could be consequences for that, but would love to see more resistance happening in that way. I think Mars in the 11th house. 11th house represents Congress and the House and the Senate, as well as those within different states. And it's ruled by, since Cancer, it's ruled by the moon in the 2nd house. So there is something to be said about um, the ways that the people, us, the common people of the nation, are particularly focused on our attention is particularly focused on national wealth and revenue, stock markets, trades, banks, and all of those different things, especially as it relates to foreign affairs. So, I mean, it's definitely something that we are paying attention to and in some ways resisting as people of the nation, that square between Mars and Cancer and then the moon in Libra, it does show that that's not just like something straightforward working out and fully being reinforced by all that stuff in the seventh house and Jupiter in the ninth house. And in fact, since a lot of the nation's kind of financial state and how we sustain ourselves is all cardinal signs, again, still looks like a lot of dysregulation. Hey, Elizabeth. Still looks like a lot of dysregulation with, again, the markets, with spending, with stocks, with trade and banks and things like that. The national wealth in general just super dysregulated. So um in some ways it looks like, they can't just do and get everything that they want without there being consequences for that, but definitely a lot of power dynamics and struggles and wrestling for power and control over um finances, especially within Congress, I would imagine. I would hope the Democrats are fighting back as much as they can against all of this stuff, and I would hope other Republicans are also fighting back and realizing like, hey, a lot of these things that y'all say is going to like reduce the national debt and things like that is increasing spending. Y'all realize that, right? I don't want to vote for that. I did see one Republican voting against some of that nonsense because he was like, hey, if y'all can do math, like this isn't working out the way that y'all are saying it's going to. So there's some hope in that sense that hopefully, yeah, hopefully there's legislation and there are people who are fighting against those things. But again, something I haven't paid too much attention to recently, just kind of going off of what the chart is saying here. And then on this topic, I would also add Pluto is in Capricorn in the fifth house. I bring that up because, again, cardinal sign dealing with the way that the nation sustains itself and the nation's wealth and things like that. Pluto represents things like metamorphosis and regeneration. It's also refuge and things around like excrement and sewers, which I thought was interesting when we were talking about the water supply and stuff earlier. It's also just aspects of life that are hidden from public view, the political underground and espionage and organized crime, um, great wealth and power, and then just other things. Pluto really gives like the tower in some ways, tower tarot card. Whenever I'm thinking about it and how it functions with astrology, so seeing it in the fifth house is interesting because the fifth house deals with things like places of amusement and entertainment, and also birthplace and children and sexual concerns, but also high society and formal social functions and ambassadors. So looking at this placement, having Pluto here in the Aries ingress kind of made me think about um, a lot of the conspiracies around affluent people and Hollywood, and also the ways that Republicans have been exposed a lot for um, all of the things that they accuse the Democrats of doing, especially in terms of like things like child trafficking and um, uh, sex workers and all that type of stuff too. So I wonder if more things like that get exposed over the years, or over the rest of the year, especially as they are trying to pass more of these bans and laws and stuff around gender and sexuality. Because it's kind of like, okay, if you're going to make these things illegal and then you get caught doing these things, now what? Now you're exposed. Um, but at the same time, because it's Pluto in Capricorn and then Saturn is in Pisces, there is a possibility that a lot of those things continue to remain unseen for some amount of time. And then under certain circumstances, maybe through more Virgo transits or like Mars moving through Virgo and stuff like that, it gets exposed. So that would be nice. But then again, if it gets exposed, is there going to be legislation or is there actually going to be like judicial or legal action taken against those people to actually give them punishments for it? Or is it just going to be like part of the news cycle that day and then nothing actually changes? I don't really know. That would be kind of frustrating if that was the case. um, what else? What else? We talked about Venus and Mercury. We talked about the sun. I guess the only other thing I would say about the moon in Libra, I guess the last thing I would say about Moon and Libra is to just reiterate that, like, yeah, I think our main focus this year as people is going to be watching our own pockets in the economy and our own financial health at the moment, and how our relationship to other countries influences that. That just is like, there's only so much going on in this particular chart that the first 6 months of the year, this is mostly what we're dealing with. So as far as what to do about it, like, yeah, getting a little bit more strict on your budgeting. If you feel like calling your representatives and that's a thing that works for you as far as action, that works. Community organizing and communal resources and mutual aids. Um, just other ways of having financial support from people that you trust, really important. And no reckless spending. I mean, I think it'll be hard to do reckless spending if everything is tariffed and expensive. So, kind of decision made for you in that sense. But yeah, being a little bit more strategic with your spending, with your funds, with your finances, and the things that you invest in seems like the biggest um, arena of life that we actually have control over in our daily lives, because the rest of this is a bit big and things kind of to observe, but that we as individuals maybe have a little bit less control over with foreign affairs and things like that. I would caution against traveling. Obviously, that's something that a lot of people have noticed anyway. But yeah, caution against traveling, especially with that Jupiter ninth house situation and all of the raids that have been happening for people who speak out against Israel and stuff like that, speaking out against the administration, different gender markers on passports and all the identification issues and immigration issues and stuff like that. I just, yeah, caution against um, traveling out of the US, and especially being out of the US and coming into the US. I just maybe hold off on that if you can, and make sure you have as much documentation on you as possible, and hope that you run into good people while you're traveling and not people who necessarily just want to enforce all the nonsense laws, because those people would come in really clutch right now. I think the only other planet that I didn't mention before I move on is Uranus and Taurus. Uranus is also in the ninth house with Jupiter. And I thought this was kind of on the nose as well. So Uranus represents things like riots and outbreaks of political tension. You can think of Uranus as being like a hyped up version of Mars, very explosive, very um, uh, a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more erratic in its behavior, unpredictable, I'll say, in its behavior and the things that it represents. So, yeah, riots and outbreaks of political tension, right wing ideologies. It also represents things like free markets, fascism, individualism, separation, but also things like scientific breakthroughs, anarchy, and nihilism. So, having it there with Jupiter kind of, I haven't talked about Jupiter moving into Gemini just yet. I'm just reading the Aries Ingress chart for 2025, which is valid for 6 months. We will definitely talk about Jupiter and Gemini another time, though. Um, but yeah, having Uranus and Jupiter in the ninth house just talks about all of those things as far as this kind of erratic and unpredictable behavior, how it pertains to our relationship to ninth house things, again, being shipping and planes and long distance travel, international communications, and laws and courts. It's just giving more unpredictable and erratic behavior in a lot of those arenas. But as far as like the Taurus of it all, um, I think something we is kind of counterintuitive. So maybe this is true, maybe this isn't true, but something I'm thinking is like, because of this stellium in the seventh house dealing with foreign affairs in other countries and our relationship to them, kind of makes me feel like we really need pressure from other countries to kind of put the US in its place. And I know that's not something that seems super ideal in terms of the guy running the country. And at the same time, he does tend to respect respect is a strong word. He does tend to comply himself to other political figures that he sees as being powerful, or at the very least tries to make deals with other powerful people who he actually like sees as worth doing business with. So on the one hand, that could stop him from just completely going off the rails, and at the same time it could subject us to kind of being indebted to other nations in that sense, thinking about the sun in the eighth house again too. So that's a tricky game, especially his relationship with Putin. But yeah, I see y'all are kind of commenting on that as well, like embargoes on the US potentially, or BRICS being something that's also come up a lot. And then the power of conformity, like, is there a way to act as a government? Not 100% sure what you mean there. If you want to expand on that idea, I'm curious. The applause for Zelensky and silence for him at the Pope's funeral had an effect. Lack of approval is a control mechanism in relationship to him. Interesting. Yeah, that could be something here too, because I was explaining earlier, Elizabeth, that Jupiter in Taurus has a lot of influence in this chart. And we know that Jupiter in mundane charts has a lot to do with like the beliefs of a nation, and political figures and religious figures of nations and their role in things like foreign affairs and uh, influence over institutions and authority figures and stuff like that. So, yeah, if he is with his own Taurus placements seeking approval from other powerful people or people that he sees powerful, even if he doesn't act like he thinks that they're powerful. Um, I do think approval, if not from his own base, which obviously he doesn't care about approval from his own base, but overall approval as a president and then approval from other nations. Like, yeah, that would be something that I could see influencing his behavior, but it depends. Oh, right after that he made a negative comment about Putin for the first time in a while. So um yeah, I would be curious to see how much approval from other nations and powerful figures, as well as just like being influenced by other powerful Western and Eastern nations, influences his behaviors too. Because there's just so much going on, especially having Saturn in that placement in that house too. Saturn being like one of the only limiting factors, even though Saturn is in relationship with Jupiter and Taurus in this case. Um, all of that Pisces does kind of put the fire of the sun in Aries out a little bit. So there could be some hope there. But overall, yeah, financial dysregulation and a lot of underground behaviors that we don't have the full story for. It's kind of what this chart is giving. So those are my thoughts on the Aries ingress, and about as in detail as I'm going to get into that. The Libra ingress for later this year has a lot more variety to it, although it does go from a Pisces stellium to a Libra stellium in the second house or in the third house of this chart. So if you want to do some of your own research over the next couple of months to just see what's going on with the Libra ingress later this year, I'll probably revisit that closer to like September or actual October. Um But if you want to look at the Libra ingress chart, it is pulled for October 17th, 2025 at 4:16 a.m. in Washington D.C. Again with all of your sidereal settings. The chart should look like Leo rising with the moon there and the south node. So, yeah. And that's going to put Venus in Virgo in the second house. It will put the sun, the Lot of Fortune, and Mercury and Mars in Libra in the third house. It puts Saturn in Pisces in the eighth house, and then Jupiter in Gemini in the 11th house. So feel free to take a look at that. And then if you want to look at the outer placements as well, that's going to put Uranus in Taurus in the 10th house, and then Neptune in Pisces in the eighth house, and then Pluto will be in Capricorn in the sixth house. So those don't change signs, but they do change houses. And so their impact on those houses will be seen. And that will take care of events for the second half of the astrological year from Libra to the next Aries ingress. So let me know what you think about that. I feel like it told me nothing new at all, which made it a little bit less exciting. The Aries ingress made it less exciting, but also made it seem like okay, it's pretty straightforward that what we're dealing with the first 6 months of the year is mostly finances and foreign relations, foreign affairs, foreign relations, and foreign conflicts and stuff like that. Legislation around women's bodies and things like that. So let's pull some cards for the new moon. Yeah. Today is a new moon in Aries. Let's see what that's about. And if you haven't liked the video, I would love it if you dropped a like on this video. Let YouTube know that I'm important and worth listening to. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I haven't pulled cards in a long time. Also, if you are curious about synastry at all, I do have a synastry workshop available for purchase in my Patreon shop. Don't buy it off the iOS app because they will charge you extra money. But if you go on your desktop, go to patreon.com/mixmercury and go to my little shop. I have some workshops for purchase there. So please take a look. Feel free. Oh, Elizabeth, happy belated birthday. I was wondering, I was thinking about that on Saturday. I was like, why does the 26th or on Friday? I was like, why does the 25th sound like a relevant day? So happy belated birthday. I hope it was wonderful. I hope you're having a good weekend as well. And thanks for being here. Yeah, feel free to catch up and let me know what you're thinking. Elizabeth has a wonderful YouTube channel as well where she actually unpacks some of the stuff going on politically from the left side of the spectrum. So feel free to check out her Resistance Live Now YouTube channel as well. Our resident Aries, Stellium. Okay. Bloop, 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 bloop. Let's get into these cards. Okay. To my divine, elevated, and healed ancestors and spirits, calling on you today for some insight into today's Aries new moon, ruled by Mars in Cancer, who is finally finishing up its retrograde and transit through Aries over the last 6 months. I would love to know any wisdom, any insight, any advice that you have for us about this lunation, and any additional insight you have into the rest of this Mars in Cancer transit. I'm also going to ask that whatever information I received in that dream last night about these placements comes back, because I have a vague memory of it, but I don't remember what it was, but it seemed relevant and I had language for it. So would love it if that energy, if that not the energy, if that language could come back so that I could share it with the homies if it's meant to be shared. And if it's not meant to be shared, I'll keep it to myself. So all right. We give thanks. We give thanks. All right. What insights can be gleaned from today's Aries new moon? Our first card, I'm going to do a 3-card spread with a card on the bottom for context at the top. King of Swords. Right out the gate. This is going to be our situation. Seven of Cups as our obstacle or conflict to be overcome. And finally, our solution, Queen of Swords. Interesting. Queen of Swords. And on the bottom, we have Judgment. Man, we've done Judgment a lot on this channel, I feel like. See you later, Elizabeth. Judgment on the bottom. All right. So, King of Swords, Seven of Cups, Queen of Swords, and Judgment for the Aries new moon. Let me pull the chart up on here as well. Oh wow, Mars in Cancer is rising right now in Austin, Texas. So the current landscape of the sky, the sun and the moon in Aries. Mercury, Venus, and Saturn are still in Pisces. Jupiter is in Taurus, and Mars is in Cancer. So not much different from the actual Aries Ingress chart. Just the rising sign changes depending on where you live. So before I read the cards, I want to just talk about the relationship between Aries and Cancer and talk a little bit more about Mars in Cancer. So, Aries and Cancer, these are cardinal signs. And something I've said a lot about cardinal signs recently is that cardinal signs usually reach for control of something externally, so something outside of them, as a way to feel better on the inside. And feel better can look like feeling better in your nervous system or in your body. It can look like feeling better in terms of your relationships with other people. It can look like feeling better in terms of feeling like you actually have some kind of control or power or leverage over a situation. And it also looks like feeling feeling better in terms of your resource sources at the moment. And that's just going through each of the cardinal signs. Um, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. For Aries and Cancer specifically, I think of these two cardinal signs as being more quick to act than Libra and Capricorn on the other side of the spectrum, right? And so for Aries, I use the word urgency because I think Aries is quick to act and quick to do, being a Mars rule placement. But I think Aries has enough awareness to know that sometimes um sometimes urgency means doing what you can in a given moment, and it may not be like the best option, but it's just something that needs to be done. And there's the feeling of needing to do it quickly, but also meeting resistance from reality. It's just kind of part of the process. But that doesn't mean action doesn't happen. It just means it's not always exactly what you want to happen. It just needs to happen quickly. So there's that urgency, that feeling of rushing or needing to do it quickly. For Cancer, I use the word immediacy. These are not really that much different words, but I think urgency has more of a feeling of needing to hurry up and do it, whereas immediacy is like, I need it now. I'm not gonna wait. I'm not gonna work and labor and toil towards it in the way that Mars would. Mars is not afraid of hard work. Mars is not afraid of overdoing it. But Cancer is more like, fuck all that. I don't want to do all that. I just want it now. It needs to appear suddenly in my hands, or I'm going to throw a fit, right? My distress is so great right now that if I don't get this thing right now, I'm going to lose my shit on everybody and everything. So, yeah, the urgency to me for Aries is I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it done. I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to push through. Cancer is like, I need it now, and I would like to have it now in the least uncomfortable way possible. So when you have Mars in a position like Cancer, where it has that innate sense of urgency but needs it now, there's a lot more it's tempered, I think, in a way that Mars and Aries is not necessarily tempered. I think Mars and Aries can be a bit unrestrained, Whereas Mars in Cancer is like, I'm kind of subject to my body in this position. I have to do what my body wants, what my body needs. I have to actually acknowledge the state of my physical body instead of just kind of mind power pushing through in the way that we'll say the sun, since the sun is there and the moon are. So it's a little bit of a kind of, as much as there is resistance to um willpower and mental toughness seeing your way through things, it's also a little bit reinforced because the moon itself is in Aries, wanting to do exactly that, wanting to push through, wanting to um ignore its own limits and things like that. So I think that's a lot of the contradiction here is I need it now and I want it now, but it's also going to take me a little bit more hard work to actually get there, and um I have to actually like acknowledge my body through this process. The rest of the sky is kind of just there as like a buffer because the Aries placements themselves are surrounded by Jupiter and Taurus on one side, and then um the Pisces stellium on the other side. So Aries is really not Aries, as much as Aries usually has the upper hand in the square, there's a lot going on to temper Aries. So I think where, like I said before, usually it's very easy to just like do the thing without too much consideration for consequences. We're in a position where comfort is more of a priority over labor and toil. So I think that's a good thing in some ways. I think it's a bad thing in other ways. It's not necessarily either or. So I'm curious for you before I read these cards, how that's manifesting for you. Um, I think as much as we are coming to terms with our discomfort, I think we're motivated by it. I've said this a million times for Mars and Cancer. Motivated by discomfort in a way that's different than just wanting to get away from it. You know, I think that's something else that Aries is really good at. Aries is really good at leaving and going away from whatever it is that doesn't feel great. But there's a little bit of staying power because of the whole Jupiter and Taurus ruling all of this Pisces stuff, and Saturn in Pisces as well. Kind of saying like, yeah, you're gonna have to actually turn towards the discomfort a little bit and get a sense for what's actually going on beneath the surface. You can't just ignore it anymore. You have to kind of feel into it and respond to it. So lots of responding to your own distress versus just trying to white knuckle through it like maybe you would normally do. So what's that look like for you guys? Are you experiencing any version of that right now? Are you are you finding it hard to have patience for yourself and others? And are you also realizing that you kind of don't have a choice but to have patience for yourself and others at the same time? Okay. So, as far as these cards go, let's start with Judgment as our context card on the bottom. Judgment, as I've heard it described by others, has a lot to do with um, reconciling what you know now with events that have happened in the past. Um, in the past, you were doing the best with what you knew at the time, and it led to whatever circumstances you're in today. And you couldn't have maybe in some ways foreseen that you would end up in the situation that you're in today. So you did your best at the time. And I think this is a very Jupiter card for me. I think with Jupiter being in Taurus, this can kind of bring up a feeling of shame. Like, dang, I wish I would have behaved differently in the past, or I wish I would have gone about this in a different way because dealing with the consequences today really sucks. Doesn't feel very good. I want to get out of this situation so bad, but the only way out is through, right? And so there could be a little bit of judgment, judging yourself, or judging the past version of you, a younger version of you, judging the more ignorant version of you who just didn't know what they didn't know and maybe didn't have the full picture or the full context back then that would have maybe led you to make different decisions today. That's kind of how I think about the judgment card. And I do think there's also something about like um hold on, let me look at something real quick. I think there's also something because when I'm looking at the actual card, it's weighing out um, a heart and a feather, and there's an original interpretation of this that I was trying to see. It's like talking about negative confessions and a list of 42 sins that the soul had not committed. Um, Talking about like Judgment Day from the Egyptian understanding of like divine judgment. And says that if the heart was lighter than the feather, then the soul would ascend to the afterlife because the feather is representing truth. I think about judgment versus discernment. The heart represents like the soul and decisions of the heart versus like the feather of truth. And so if the heart was lighter than the feather, then you would go to the afterlife. But if the heart was heavier, that would imply that you're carrying maybe the weight of your sins and judgment and all that kind of stuff. So then the soul would be devoured and destroyed, and you'd be sent to whatever their version of hell was, right? But because we're still alive, um, there's still an opportunity, one, to self reflect and to move forward in a different way, but then to also just like learn from the past. Um, there's an opportunity to change. And what I think is also interesting about this, knowing that we're dealing with a lot of swords in the other part, is that swords also represent something to do with like trust in the truth too, as do mutable signs. So, let me kill this bug. Hold on. Can I? Oh no. Okay. Um, so yeah, I think there's something to be said about being honest with yourself here. So on the one hand, that's another spin on being heavy-hearted, right? Like carrying a lot of guilt and shame. I think on the one hand, if we're talking about like the judging, if we're talking about judgment in general and discernment and all this mutable stuff around what you knew then versus what you know now with more information, I think when we're talking about telling yourself the truth and being honest with yourself, which is King of Swords and Queen of Swords energy, but starting with King of Swords as like the situation, being honest with yourself about especially okay, lots of things coming forward. Hold on. So let's talk about Aries in the context of judgment because Aries suffers the wound of abandonment and neglect and also the wounds around being disowned, right? Like someone has abdicated their responsibility for you and they've just decided that, you are capable enough to take care of yourself. I don't need to be responsible for you. And so through that experience of neglect and abandonment and being disowned, you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You learn to take matters into your own hands. You learn to just do whatever you can in order to survive. And sometimes that also means being responsible for other people along the way because nobody else is going to take care of them. You're kind of the only other person around if you're someone like the eldest sibling, I think about with Aries a lot too. Um, so the truth of that situation is that, yeah, you were probably too young to be doing a lot of that stuff, especially doing a lot of it on your own. And because of just the ignorance of youth, some of the decisions you made along the way had consequences or impacts on other people that maybe you don't want to take ownership for, or that you beating yourself up about. And it's like, depending on where you fall in that spectrum, sometimes you just have to be honest about the fact that, like, yeah, I got to take some personal responsibility for my actions. And I also have to give myself the grace to know that like I didn't know any better. Like if nobody was around to tell me what better was and looked like, I could only do what I could do at the time. And what I knew to do at the time was to stay alive. So I think if the situation is being honest with yourself, it is being honest about the fact that like, yeah, I don't feel very good about some decisions that I've made previously, maybe. Hey Desiree. Um, I don't feel I mean, we're talking about all this water in the sky too, like, I don't feel good about choices that I've had to make in the past. It's weighing on my conscience, it's weighing on my spirit, it's maybe, put me in a situation where I don't have all the things that I need, and so now I have to restructure my life moving forward to figure out what it is that I actually need and how to resolve some of these past conflicts. But then we get to the 7 of Cups in the middle, And the 7 of Cups, ironically, this is a very Pisces card for me too, so I think it's interesting to see it here. 7 of Cups kind of represents, in some ways, I think the illusion of choice. Um, in some ways can represent the illusion of choice, but I think it can also represent this kind of like decision paralysis, or this idea that like, um, this idea that like there's only one right answer, and so it's hard to pick which is the single most right correct answer. And the reality is, like, I think I said this on the last live, that any decision you make just opens up more decisions for you to make moving forward. So it's, in some cases, in the literal sense, yes, some decisions can be life or death, but for the most part, making one decision just leads to another universe of decisions, and the more that you make decisions, the closer you get to, well, the more you make decisions, the more experiences you have, the more you learn along the way, right? So I think the having that in the position of like it being an obstacle, especially having it right below the judgment card, does kind of represent, yeah, like, actually kind of feels like being afraid to move forward, or being afraid to let go, or being afraid to actually embrace the power that you do have, do or did have. It can be present or past tense in different situations. Like, yes, it's true that you did the best you could with what you had, and um you did actually embrace your power in that moment, and your actions have consequences, your actions have impacts. And so if you're feeling like, the quote bad decisions you made in the past um make you afraid to make decisions to move forward, then that's one thing, right? Like, you are maybe putting too much pressure on yourself, that you can't pick yourself up and move forward from any decisions you make moving forward from this moment. I feel like that didn't come out super clear, but we'll rock with it. Something else I was also thinking about, a competing thought, is that, maybe it feels like the decisions you've made in the past, that you've just gotten lucky. And maybe they weren't conscious decisions you were making. You were kind of just like going with the flow, or maybe somebody else was making decisions for you. And so now you've reached a point where you have to actually take ownership of your choices and decisions moving forward. And it's scary because now the responsibility just falls on you and doesn't fall on somebody else, right? You have to get yourself into or out of whatever situation you're trying to get into or out of, and nobody else can tell you what the correct answer is. And so you feel stuck and concerned that if you actually were to take the reins and move forward, then you're going to be responsible for whatever happens after that, right? Which I think leads to the Queen of Swords. And the Queen of Swords to me is like knowing your version of the truth, knowing what's true for you, knowing what's real for you, knowing what's honest for you, what's authentic to you, what's real to you, whatever it is. And like having some certainty, having some self trust, having some self belief that even if you don't know where this is all headed, you kind of have a vision of where you would like to go, or what you would like to happen. And if you don't have that, cultivating that would be a good idea, because it makes this seem like there's a lot less wrong answers to choose. Um, because the correct answer is going to be the one that feels authentic and honest for you, versus like doing something that somebody else wants you to do, or trying not to disappoint anybody, or having a little too much awareness of how it's going to impact everybody else. Or if you're in a situation where you're trying to be considerate, then you can choose the option that best suits whatever outcome it is that you want to have. So I think something about this is, cutting through the bullshit. Again, being honest with yourself, getting honest about the outcome that you want, and the path towards achieving that outcome, which is something that I think Aries and Cancer can do really well together when they're not fighting each other. They can say, look, if this is the outcome that we want, if this is where we want to end up, this is the path forward. We have to take this path and we can't deviate from it, because if we try to achieve a certain outcome, but we don't do all the necessary steps that it takes to get there, we're going to end up doing a bunch of bullshit along the way. Like we're going to be led astray, we're going to get distracted, we might fall into certain behaviors that don't feel authentic. We could just end up somewhere that's not so we could end up somewhere that we're not prepared for, or we could end up hurting people along the way, hurting ourselves along the way, or really again just getting distracted. This just feels like remaining in a haze through inaction. And I think even the King of Swords, as the situation, is saying something about the fact that like you do have the answers that you need within you. Um, it's just a matter of like being confident in who you are, being confident in what you desire. And if you aren't confident, like what is the process you need to do to actually like embrace that? No, I'm not doing readings right now. I'm doing a reading for the Aries. I'm doing a reading right now for the Aries new moon. So you'll want to rewind and check that out. I have contemplated coming on and doing readings for tips though, because your boy needs money, but payday is coming up first. So I'm gonna check that out and then see from there. But yeah, so that's kind of my thought. I'm gonna look and see if there's anything I'm missing about King of Swords real quick. Curious if this resonates with you guys at the time of this spicy new moon in Aries. That's King of Cups. I need King of Swords. Bloop. Leadership through unbiased judgment. If the King of Swords looks a little judgmental, that's because he is. So while he is stern, he is also deeply ethical and trustworthy. And if he were a politician, his strong moral code would make him impervious to corruption. So yeah, that kind of goes with what we were saying about being true to yourself and true to your values and true to who you are authentically is the guide, is the thing providing direction and guidance for your decision making. So instead of getting hung up on um yes, I'm looking up the meaning to make sure there's nothing else that I forgot about. Um, because then it'll be easy to get distracted by all of the different choices that you can make, all of the different directions that you could go in. So it's good to know that the thing that is guiding you in this moment, especially with judgment being the card on the bottom and being the context for all of this, it's like yeah, not wanting to make the same mistakes twice or not getting too bogged down by a person that you were in the past or decisions you made in the past or the place that you're coming from and realizing that you do have a little bit more power and control as an adult or as maybe you've been unburdened by responsibilities for other people or we're talking about Pisces and Taurus stuff in the sky, like trying to please other people or gain approval from other people who don't have your best interest in mind. There's a little bit of this implies that being true to yourself relieves you of those burdens because the choices that you make moving forward also are ways to set boundaries with other people and to kind of get other people's thoughts out of your head, right? Um, because this could also be other people's thoughts in your head telling you that one way is a better way of doing something than the other. But yeah, the point is to have faith in your own truth, to believe yourself, and to make decisions based off of what's going to be best for whatever goal or whatever idea you have for yourself moving forward. So those are my thoughts about this. Um, apply broadly and widely, especially as it pertains to whatever situation it is that you are dealing with and all of the nuances of that. So It is what, 1:30? As much as I would like to do tipped readings today, I actually really need to be accountable to myself. Another theme I would add to this, and not overexert my energy because I am on medication that's makes it hard to um, endure. So I've used a lot of mental energy today. So I'm just gonna stick to what my plan was today. I'm sorry, Cursed Runway, but I would love to do tipped readings for y'all maybe next week. Um, After we discuss whatever we're gonna discuss. And in the meantime, I would love it if you gave this video a like. Feel free to drop any additional comments that you have left. I'm gonna start wrapping up and I'll be done right at 1:30. So yeah, what do you guys think? Pretty interesting chat. Again, thanks for your patience with me not being here last week and taking care of my body. Because, yeah, I really needed to do that. And I'm glad that I didn't wait. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Yes, I am towards the end of my antibiotic course. I just have the rest of the day and tomorrow, and then I'm done. It was a rough week. It was so rough. I hate being on antibiotics in general, but these in particular were a lot. And doing that and working an 8-hour job, or 8-hour job, a full-time job, ghetto. Grateful to be working somewhere that is very flexible and very accommodating and very, very kind. I really landed in the right spot. So shout out to that. Oh, I just got hungry. Yep, it's time for me to go. Shout out to Mars and Cancer for actually making us responsive to our bodies and for actually taking action, um, for actually taking actions that serve us versus that serve to separate us from our bodies even more. And if that's something that you are working on with the rest of this transit, we still have plenty of ways to go. Mars is only at 9 degrees Cancer, so it's going to be there till like June. So make the best of it. Make the best of this transit and do things that feel good, not just as a way to ignore your problems. No numbing. Well, a little bit of numbing. A little bit of numbing goes a long way, but also do things that actually nurture and nourish your mind, body, and spirit. And I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for listening. And if you're watching this back later, feel free to drop a comment and tell me what you think. I appreciate you guys so much. And cue outro music. See y'all next time. Bye.